8 in Surah Aal-Imraan. Alhamdulillah, this verse is a verse that's very profound, very deep, because it deals with a particular circumstance within the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the Battle of Uhud. So as we know, in the Battle of Uhud, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Muslim army had initially lost the war. So many of the companions had passed away because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told them, the archers, to stay on Uhud. And alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity when I went to Hajj and Umrah to go to that mountain and actually see it. And I'm curious, how many people have been to Uhud, actually been to the mountain of Uhud? So only a handful, and I would inshallah encourage all of us to actually go to that mountain and look at it. Because it's really a lesson of listening to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and not being caught with your desires. Because the archers, they saw the end of the war, they saw the booty, they saw the riches, the wealth, and they wanted to go for it. They didn't want to listen to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And Khalid bin Walid, who was a non-Muslim at the time, he saw the Muslims move, not stay in their post, in their lane, and in their position, and he took advantage, and he went around. So when this happened, there was chaos in the ranks. The Muslims didn't know. They had thought they had won. And all of a sudden now they're in a state of retreat. And they're questioning what's going on. And in this moment, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was being attacked. And many people don't know this in the Battle of Uhud, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ almost passed away. That the armors, the kuffar of the Quraysh came close to him. And there's one riwayah that says that they got so close to him that they actually hit his head and blood started coming down from his face. And even one of his teeth, his canines, were broke at the time. And the Muslims that were there were protecting the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and making sure that he was not killed. And Fatima radiallahu anha, she went and protected the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and she brought actually certain aid to make sure that the blood would not continue to flow from his head. So in this moment of chaos, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made a dua. So many of the companions, after they had successfully pushed back the kuffar Quraysh, they told the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, why don't you curse these kuffar Quraysh? Look at all the things they've done to you. And he says, إِنِّي لَمْ أَبْعُثْ لَعَانًا. I did not come here as someone who cursed. وَلَكِنِّي بَعْثْتُ دَاعِيًا. I was sent as someone who was calling people. I'm not here to curse people and to curse them out, but I'm here to call them وَرَحْمَةً, and I'm a mercy. رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So if I'm a mercy, how can I curse these people? And then he makes a prayer, subhanAllah. Then he turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After he addresses his own people, he says, Allahumma igfir liqawmi fa'innahum la ya'lamun. He said, Ya Allah, forgive my people because they do not know. So he says, Ya Allah, these people are ignorant. So don't punish them. And you see this similarly in Ta'if, when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was pushed out of Ta'if. People were throwing stones at him. And there's one narration that Jibreel alayhi salam, he came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He said, do you want me to take these two mountains where the people in Ta'if live and crush them? And crush the people? And he said, no, I don't want that. Maybe from the future, from their children, they will become believers. And we know now the city of Ta'if is a believing community. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says after أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ليس لك من الأمر شيء أن يتوب عليهم أو يعذبهم فإنهم الظالمون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, says that you don't necessarily have a particular affair. The tawbah, it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the forgiveness. And if you can forgive them, or that they are punished, but at the end of the day, these kuffar, they are ظالمون. وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And everything in the heavens and the earth belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يَغْفِرُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to forgive whoever He wills. And the ulama and the scholars here, they say in that battle of Uhud, who were the people that were most against the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Khalid bin Walid, he's the one that led the retreat. And what happened? He became Muslim, subhanAllah. Who was the person that was screaming to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that this is a day? He said, "Yawma lak wa yawma alayk." He said, one day is for you and one is against you. What was he saying? That Badr, in Badr we lost, but in Uhud we won. Who said that? Abu Sufyan. And later he became Muslim. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to forgive, وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ, and He has the ability to punish whoever He wills. Abu Lahab and others that work consistently and persistently against the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Wallahu ghafurur rahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ghafur and Rahim. And as we discussed before, these names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not arbitrary, that they're connecting. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying He's Ghafur, He is forgiving. Why? Because He is Rahim, He's merciful. That someone who is merciful and has power, a parent, a manager, a director, they have the ability to forgive, or they have the ability to punish. They could fire their employee. They could tell someone to leave their house. But because they have power, then they are forgiving. And they see that it's natural for humans to make a mistake. A child, an employee, an old elderly parent. We love these people. We take care of them. We ask for forgiveness, but we also ask for accountability. And here the ulama, they also cite a verse of Nuh alayhi salam. So in the Quran you have different paradigms. You have Yunus alayhi salam, who became frustrated with his people and then he left prematurely. And he was swallowed in the belly of the whale and then he returned back to his people. And then you have the example of Nuh alayhi salam, who generation after generation he did da'wah and the people continuously did not listen to him. So this is a story of frustration that all of us feel. And at the end of his life, he said, "Rabbi la tadhar ala al-ardi min al-kafirin diyara." He said, "Ya Allah, do not leave any house on this earth of the kuffar. Destroy all of them." And we have both of these paradigms in the Quran of Yunus alayhi salam, that he left his people, but then he went back and all of them believed. But we also have the paradigm of Nuh alayhi salam, where he called his people generation after generation, وَلَا يَلِدُوا إِلَّا فُجَّارًا, that when they gave birth, it was generational kufr. Every single generation, they would promote their kufr and their disbelief. So we have both of these examples. And we have the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that initially the Meccans, they threw him out of his home. He was a refugee in Medina. And eventually he goes back, and the people of Mecca would believe. After the battle of Badr and Uhud and Khandaq and all these affairs, his people were believers, and he forgave them based on the teachings of the Quran and his own particular sunnah. So brothers and sisters in Islam, to conclude, we see the importance of us identifying with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Anbiya and Salihin. When we live our lives, there will be moments where we're extremely frustrated. And there will be moments where people will be stubborn and they won't listen. And we'll be in the position of Nuh alayhi salam. And it's important in that moment that we have to do hijrah. We maybe have to move to a different job. We have to move to a different country. Many of you, mashallah, here are migrants, immigrants. And Nuh alayhi salam, he got on the boat because he knew that his people were going to be destroyed. And he prayed. And people have the right to pray against injustice and people who are committing injustice. And he took that migration on the boat, the safina of taqwa, the safina, the boat of the hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have the example of Yunus alayhi salam, where he was upset and frustrated with his people, but he eventually went back. So sometimes it's important for us to take a break, to reflect, and then to come back with a renewed sense of purpose. And we have the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he was hurt by his people in Ta'if and in Uhud and many circumstances. And not just verbally. Verbally is difficult. All of us feel that in our heart, but also physically. We don't realize that people threw stones at the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People cracked part of his skull. They cracked his teeth. But he was a person who forgave. And eventually the people of Mecca embraced him, and he was able to go home. So as we read the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's important for us to place ourselves with these different characters and these different righteous figures. That all of us in our lives will be in their shoes. And then we reflect on the last two names, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, or Ghafur Ar-Rahim, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is forgiving. So all of us, inshallah, should remember this, Al-Ghafur, and make a prayer for forgiveness. And we should pray for the forgiveness of other people. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahim. He خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here that He controls everything, is in His hand. He controls everything in the heavens and the earth, but He has the ability to forgive and merciful. That in this state of power, that He owns everything, He could destroy. He could have revenge. He could annihilate all of us. But He chose to have mercy upon us and then send the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is a mercy, rahmatan lil alameen, a mercy to all of creation. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.